one of our haters who are out there watching.
I want to warn people about hypnoporn.
We need to stay meta.
Stop that.
Need new tires? Like, what?
If Jim would shut up for a second.
Oh, high fidelity.
Okay, don't tell me to shut up.
I'm not whining.
I eat doggies. I eat doggies. Feels like a party.
Stop that.
It's a war. They have made it so that I cannot be celebrating July 4th.
I don't care. I'm gonna lie, I'm not gonna pretend. I don't care. How do I think? That's what I think. I don't care.
We're going to have to be smart. We're going to have to be strategic. We're going to have to be aggressive.
I'm an alpha guy.
I'll flip a table every time you aren't getting by.
Let's go. Just push.
It's all psychological warfare.
I'm not part of QAnon.
We know what they are doing.
For Trump.
If shit goes wrong, like, I will literally have to leave the country. Stop that. I'll land my initial plane.
Okay, high five. This isn't the hi-fi show.
Good night. Nighty-night.
This is 6 Degrees of Stew. You don't need to stay meta, but I'm glad you're here.
There's an article from 1976. It was in the New York Times. The author was Berkeley Rice, and he was allowed to observe Moon at a sunrise service in Belvedere, the church's estate in Tarrytown, New York. And he details some of the things that he saw while he was there. By 6 a.m., Moon was speaking to about 500 young members who had come up there by church buses from New York City. And he describes that when Moon laughed, they smiled. When he yelled, they stared back in silence. And he goes through talking about, that service. And when he finished up, an associate had led the audience in 15 minutes of prayer.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, Father, we are your children, Father. Please open up our hearts, Father. The world is suffering.
And they were asked repeatedly, would you sacrifice yourself to the church? Would you sacrifice to your church? And to each question, they all responded in unison, yes, Father. Yes, Father. Yes, Father. So he watched that 15-minute prayer. And then after service, Moon marched up to this hilltop that overlooked the Hudson. And, he had all these bodyguards around him, and he was followed by all the members trailing behind him. And he stood where members call at the Holy Rock. And Moon was said to visit this place sometimes every day to go and pray at this rock. But it's considered very holy by members. Moon. Everybody stood around and they sang some church hymns. And then Moon gave a 10-minute speech that was in Korean. And then he left right after the prayer. And he just took off. That was it. Berkeley Rice reports that he returned to the Holy Rock. And when he got there were, 15 to 20 Moonies who were surrounding the rock and kneeling around it and praying. Even though Moon was gone, he had just been there, and it was still the reverence of him being there. And they were down on their knees and saying, Father, oh Father, oh Father, please help us, please help us. And they were so enthralled with that experience of him being there. So it was kind of a interesting read and an inside look at someone being allowed to be at a Mooney service and see Moon up close and personal and with the followers and how they interacted. So now we're going to move along to the influence of the Japanese unificationists, because they had a huge influence on how the Unification Church grew and the way it was shaped in the United States. So I think it's really important to talk about that. When we talk about the influence of Japanese followers and the techniques that they brought to the U.S., we have to go back to the Japanese branch of the Unification Church. That was started by Sun Choi, who smuggled himself there in 1958. He was in prison for some months and was to have no success for over a year when he managed to convert the first Japanese member, who was a woman. And then his breakthrough came in, I think it was like late 1962,
when he converted a group of young leaders in Japan. And then there was a sect established in Japan in 1978. From there on, the Unification Church was like a new religious movement in Japan, and it seemed to grow in strength from then on. In 1965, because Choi got deported from Japan, he then moved to California. And that's really where he starts to grow with others. And he takes some of the lessons that he learned in Japan and makes sure that there is success for the Unification Church in the United States. And that's where a lot of the ideas come from in building the strength of the Unification Church in the United States. One of the features of the Japanese movement that was kind of a hallmark of the church in the Bay Area, and that's where he had moved to, that became a greater success and kind of led to the widespread accusations of mind control and brain control techniques, is because they developed a very stringent and systematic training program that became very successful. Whereas in Japan, they had this kind of haphazard, and it was an informal type of method that they employed over in Japan that really wasn't quite successful. So they learned from that. And whenever they came to the US and started the unification movement here, they learned their lessons. So they knew they kind of had to be a well-oiled machine, so to speak. So they made their trainings more sophisticated. They started the training sessions for potential recruits and the members themselves as well. They had regular staff that were employed to run the teachings. Every session had a familiar pattern to it. Like I said, they weren't just these haphazard thrown together things. It became much more structured. Another thing that was interesting in looking at Japan and how the early Unification Church was here in the United States, that there's this bitter relationship, and we're going to go into that later when we look at the assassination of Shinzo Abe, is that because of the relationship between Korea and Japan, the unification movement in Japan tended to focus on the teachings of the Unification Church rather than their origins. So they didn't talk a lot about Moon or his origin story. They talked about the teaching. And that was a practice that the early unificationists brought to the Bay Area. It was more about the teachings. So a lot of early members would not hear about Moon until they had become converts and were in the movement for a while, or they had been in a group for several days or weeks. And that was just a typical way to, that was generally just practice, but that came from Japan too. Not for any other reasons than that's what they were doing in Japan. And because of the relationships between Japan and Korea, the kind of soured relationship, they talked about the religious teachings and not Moon. And that kind of just carried over in the unification movements up, although Moon did it for different reasons later on. But that is just what the Bay Area was doing, and it kind of stuck within the Moonies as they progressed in the United States. And certainly this did help whenever the larger controversies happened as we move. And we're going to talk about this too into the Fraser report after, things had also Jonestown, when people, were very concerned about cults then, the Manson family, incidents. I mean, a lot of cult things are happening and parents are becoming concerned, and there are reports of abuses with Moon. So, it did benefit the cult in their recruiting efforts. So there are some benefits that it was being taught that way in the beginning. And then, Moon, of course, exploits that. So it was certainly to Moon's benefit that there was that schism between Japan and Korea, and the techniques that they used when they came to the Bay Area because of that schism. So Moon carrying it on, was a benefit to him whenever the major scandals started happening in the U.S. and for recruitment numbers as well. Under Choi's leadership, the California movement started to grow slowly at first. The original community of 8 had doubled itself with 8 new American members. It was to continue doubling its membership each year until 1971. By 1970, the group was operating on a budget of $250,000. It was in 1970 that Choi announced the next stage of the community's development. From now on, we will increase our project to actualize the international ideal city built on our land. We will look for even more and better land. Later, we will expand, making our own city, our own bank and currency, our own everything. We will experiment. If we can establish the ideal city system, we can win the whole world. The political principles was to be one of the divine democracy. There was to be free enterprise with social welfare, freedom to be allowed only under the truth, which is constructive and instructive for all. 3 phases of construction work were planned for the following 3 years, and work was enthusiastically started on 600 acres of land in Boonville, Mendocino County, California. After about 6 months, however, the building and improvements came to a halt, and the Boonville site became not the international ideal city, but a place for festivals and training sessions. During the early 1970s, Mr. Cho's group continued to grow. It no longer conceived itself as a local movement. The Re-Education Center became an international re-education foundation, the IRF. It developed a number of small businesses, and it sponsored a series of banquets to which local dignitaries were invited. An International Pioneer Academy was set up at the imposing headquarters in Page Street, San Francisco. Then in 1971, the federal government's Alternative Services Program approved the foundation as an acceptable alternative service to the draft for conscientious objectors. Within the community, the House organization proliferated into 12 discrete departments with individual heads. Choi's group was no longer a family, it had become an organization. Until the late 1960s, the movement in America had not shown an active interest in politics, but anti-communist activities had played a significant role in the movement in Korea and Japan for some time, and it was partly in order to forge a link with the church there that Miss Kim's group founded the Freedom Leadership Foundation, the LFF, in the summer of 1969. The stated primary objective was to develop standards of leadership necessary to address the cause of freedom in the struggle against communism. One of the first LFF activities was to organize a three-day fast for freedom in Vietnam. This produced a telegram of gratitude from Richard Nixon. Not all of the members were happy about all of the anti-communist activities in which the group became involved. Later, the LFF was to come under scrutiny of the Fraser Commission. One of the chief witnesses testifying against the Unification Church was Alice Tate Wood. Life in these centers was communal in everything but sex and money.
I liked sex a lot.
The Washington Center was busy, businesslike, and the work went from 2 fronts, religious and political. Organizations needed for these tours was the only chief instrument in uniting the various groups to form a national movement. But behind these was the fact that Moon himself had very definitely arrived to take charge. It is reported that when asked how the 2 groups would relate in the future, Moon expressed hurricane-like fury at Satan in the vision of the American family. They are one, he thundered. There is no Miss Kim's group and no Mr. Kin's group and no Mr. Choi's group. There are all Mr. Moon's group. Missionaries will be recalled to Korea. Members will be interchanged, and all members will go through my training, even your president, Farley Jones. The whole structure and organization of the movement was changed. Members from all of these groups were transferred to different missionaries in different locations. Special training programs were set up, and there were lectures on the principles as taught in Korea. Specially selected and trained members were sent to prepare for the way for Moon's revival meetings in 7 major cities throughout the states, starting in the Lincoln Center, New York, in February 1972. One of the innovations which emerged during the early 1970s and which contributed towards uniting local groups into a national movement was the emergence of small teams of people who traveled around the country in buses, liaising with state representative and local entities. These teams were initially developed in 1972 for evangelizing purposes. They were referred to as the One World Crusade and were joined in early 1973 by members from Europe and Japan to form an international One World Crusade. But all of this needed money. Door-to-door sales had been tried unsuccessfully as early as 1961, but until 1972, the movement in the West had relied mainly on other small church businesses or on the members tithing their income from outside members. The breakthrough came almost by accident when members in Maryland realized just how successfully they could garner donations. They produced thousands of candles, which were sold to other centers. In the summer of 1972, the members found themselves under pressure to raise $294,000 as a down payment for a 22-acre, $850,000 estate, Belvedere, in Tarrytown, New York State. Candle factories were set up in various centers, and express candle vans took the still warm candles to other centers. 2 mobile teams each, with about 15 members, sold candles full-time, one on the East Coast and one on the West. They were the first mobile fundraising teams, MFTs. By July 1973, individuals were averaging sales of nearly 1,000 a week. The movement's income in 1974 was estimated to be $8 million, almost all of which, according to the president of the movement in America, Neil Sloan, came from street sales of peanuts, candles, flowers, and dry flower arrangements. The MFTs had split during 1974 into National Headquarters, MFT for general church expenses, and Father's MFT for special projects. But many estimate that the money sent from Japan, where there were 120 flower-selling teams working 7 days a week, were probably even more important for the Moons and property purchases than the American MFTs. And Moon himself had declared, quote, "I have brought millions of dollars from Korea and elsewhere to buy so many buildings." The Unification Church was concerned not merely with numbers of people who were to learn of its existence, but also attracting the attention of people with importance or influential positions in society. The Korean Cultural and Freedom Foundation, founded by Colonel Pak in 1962 to foster Korean-American relations, promoted, among other cultural organizations, the Little Angels. By 1974, the Korean Ballet Company had completed 7 world tours and given over 1,000 performances, including one at the White House and in the presence of the Queen. From late 1973, professors and students were also contacted through a series of programs and meetings on campuses through the USA by CART. A further development was the organization of international leadership seminars, which brought hundreds of students from European and Japanese universities to America in order to introduce them to the unification beliefs. It was a result of English students' attendance at the ILS that Reverend Moon and the Unification Church first hit the headlines in the British papers, and the reports were far from reassuring. Moon's espousing of religious freedom and anti-communist zeal won broad support in the feeble Cold War atmosphere of the day. In Latin America, he founded the Confederation of the Associations for Unification, which, according to U.S. intelligence sources, sent cash and supplies to Contra rebels and funded the motley band of paramilitaries, cocaine cartels, and fugitive Nazi war criminal Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, who orchestrated the right-wing coup that toppled Bolivia's democratically elected government in 1980. Moon's interest expanded into the film industry when a church-linked company backed the 1982 Incheon movie, a $42 million Korean war epic, notable for bad reviews and the casting of Laurence Olivier as General Douglas MacArthur.
In a land torn by conflict, Jacqueline Bissett is the woman who has never known war. Ben Gazzara, Richard Roundtree, and Toshiro Mifune are the men who have never known anything else. And Sir Laurence Olivier is General Douglas MacArthur, who guided their destinies to a place called Incheon, rated PG.
Words from Sun Moon, April 19th, 1998. "Don't you think Father has loved America?" he said on April 19th. "Yes," his followers responded together. "More than anyone else?" Moon asked. "Yes," the crowd said. "More than even George Washington?" "Yes." Who was the first one to love this country?" Moon said. "Father." "Between George Washington and the true parents, who is in a higher position?" Moon asked. "True parents," the crowd responded. In 1998, Moon gets harder to pinpoint because his mission kept changing. Right now it's a campaign under the guise of the Family Federation to bless millions of couples. Moon's followers were then collecting signatures on an innocuous pro-family pledge in which couples could affirm their fidelity to each other and their faith in God. Church officials say that 120 million couples have already received their blessing, although that figure seems unlikely. The campaign dismayed some church members back then because a blessing from Moon used to be a hard-won privilege, typically attained only after a person had joined the church, worked for it for several years, and had agreed to marry somebody, usually a stranger selected by Moon. In Moon's later years, he faced personal setbacks. In 1984, his son, Hyung Jin, died at 17 from injuries sustained in a car crash. And this is how it is described as Moon attended his funeral. Father walked to the front of the room, and instantly all sounds of weeping ceased. He told the funeral gathering that Hyung Jin was now the leader of the spirit world. His death had been a sacrificial one. Satan was attacking the Reverend Moon for his anti-communist crusade by claiming the life of his second son. Like Abel before him, Hyung Jin had been the good son. Hyung Jin, Father said, was already teaching in the spirit world the divine principle. Jesus himself was so impressed by Hyung Jin that he stepped down from his position and proclaimed the son of Sun Moon the king of heaven. Father explained that Hyung Jin's status was that of a regent. He would sit on the throne of heaven until the arrival of the Messiah, Sun Moon. Now, this did create a theological problem with the dedication of Hyung Jin Moon, because that Sun Moon teaches that the kingdom of heaven is attainable only by married couples, not by single individuals. So Moon dealt with this rather quickly. Less than 2 months after he had died, a wedding ceremony was held in which Sun Moon joined his dead son in marriage to Sumpak, the daughter of Bohaipak, one of his original disciples. Hoon Sok's brother, Jin Sumpak, was also married the same day to his daughter, Jin Moon. The joint wedding was on February 20th, 1984, and many people have described this wedding ceremony as bizarre, and I'm going to go through a description of that. Everyone gathered at the Belvedere Mansion for the double wedding that February, just as they had for every 2 years before, in their white ceremonial robes. Moon and Mrs. Moon presided first over the wedding of their daughter, Injin, to Jin Sung-pak. Immediately following the ceremony, the crowd fell silent as Hoon Suk carried the ornate library in a formal white wedding gown and veil. A beautiful young woman, she was 21, an aspiring ballerina. The Reverend Moon would found the Universal Ballet Company in Korea to highlight her talent under the stage name Julia Moon. She carried a framed portrait of Hyung Jin down the aisle to the mother and father. There was a stand-in who stood for the dead brother next to the bride. He repeated the vows that Hyung Jin was not able to recite. Hoon Suk was said to be a beautiful bride. People have stated that this ceremony could be seen as strange to those outside of the Unification Church, but this wouldn't have been the first time that Sun Moon joined the living with the dead in matrimony. He had done this before for older single members. They were often matched to members who had gone to the spirit world, and they would have stand-ins too. There was one instance where Sun Moon actually matched Jesus to an elderly Korean woman. So, of course, this wasn't one of the stranger things that he had done within the church in marriages. A few years later, after the holy wedding, Julia Moon and the long-dead Hyung Jin Moon would become parents. She didn't actually give birth. Hyung Jin's younger brother, Hyung Jin, and his wife just gave Julia their newborn son to raise as their own. So that is how they became parents. Now, Sun Moon and Mrs. Moon's daughter was pretty upset whenever she had to get married to James. Moon insisted, though, and she stood by him. It was an arranged marriage, and that's just what you had to do when you're in the Moon family. By the 1990s, Moon had already lost some of his political leverage as communism had crumbled, the Berlin Wall's going down. We had everything that happened with the USSR. So he was starting to lose a lot of his political capital. Democrats seized control of Congress and the White House, and many disillusioned followers began turning their backs on the church. Moon, who believed that America's culture of moral degradation caused his children's downfall, and he grew bitter towards his adopted country, and he had brandished Satan's harvest. In 1995, Nan Suk-hong, the wife of his eldest son, Hoi Jin Moon, who was at one time Moon's heir apparent, broke from the family. She fled the family compound in Irvington, New York, taking her 5 children
and subsequently filed for divorce and for a restraining order against Hyojin. In affidavit, she outlined a tale of drug use and spousal abuse by him, accusing him of secreting himself in the master bedroom, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, drinking alcohol, using cocaine, and watching porn. She said he beat her repeatedly, even when she was pregnant. Hyojin, through his lawyers, denies Nansuk's accusations. Hyojin was jailed for a few months after failing to obey a court order to pay $65,000 toward Nansuk's legal fees. The affidavits by Moon's former daughter-in-law, Nansuk Hong, brought into view another damaging claim that had never been made by a family member, that corrupting amounts of cash accumulated around the upper echelons of the Moon family. Quote, on one occasion, I saw Hyojin bring home a box about 24 inches wide, 12 inches tall, and 6 inches deep, she said in one affidavit. He stated that he received it from his father. He opened it and showed me its contents. It was filled with $100 bills stacked in bunches of $10,000 each, for a total of $1 million in cash. She added that he had given $600,000 to the Manhattan Center Studios, a recording facility he ran for the church, and he kept $400,000 right in their room, petty cash for his own use. A church spokesman has said that the allegations about the misuse of church funds are untrue. By the end of 1997, Hyojin and Nansuk reached a divorce agreement in which she was granted full custody of their children. Nansuk Hong has written a tell-all memoir, In the Shadows of the Moods. She also appeared on 60 Minutes.
He was very abusive, both physically and emotionally. He is alcoholic. He's addicted to drugs.
After all, isn't it give and take?
And she told us he was high on cocaine or some other drug when he made this rambling, angry, off-color speech to a church group.
I'm standing here being judged by you. What the f*** do you judge me by? Huh?
Nansuk didn't even know Hyojin when she was chosen to marry him, and she certainly didn't expect a drug addict. She'd been brought up believing that the Reverend Moon's family was without sin.
We had a lot of Moon and his family pictures that, as a child, as a teenager, we adored, we admired, we looked at those nice smiles and happy family, and we thought that was ideal family. Moon is perfect human being. He's the only perfect human being on the earth. And he can choose his wife, and his wife becomes perfect as well. And so his children become perfect because they are from this perfect man and perfect woman. Theology that he is the perfect man who can create perfect family, I think kind of falls apart if I look at his children.
The Moons gave birth to 13 children, and Nansuk soon learned that her husband is the worst of them. She lived with him here at the Moons' opulent estate north of New York City. She says the Moons knew all about her husband's drug problem, but still they spoiled him, kept showering him with cash.
When he needed cash, he went to his mom, and his mom would give him from $1,000 up to, $50,000.
Where did all this cash come from?
I believe mainly it's coming from Japan. When Japanese leaders come in, they bring cash in, and basically they give to Reverend and Mrs. Moon. He basically used for his cocaine, his party, his hostess, bar hopping.
Hyojin told her he was entitled to have affairs because his father had had them. And she says Reverend Moon himself confirmed to her that he had had affairs, but the Reverend told her that God wanted him to.
He told me in person that he called it providential affairs.
What is
it's providential means it's God's mission. So he had to have these affairs, extramarital affairs, because it was providential. It was God's mission that he had to fulfill. That's the one single most worst thing that you can do. But Hyojin did many times, and his parents know, but there's nothing they do.
But worse than the affairs, she says, the Reverend's eldest son would beat her.
He was doing his cocaine ritual, and against my better judgment, I went and said, I really have to talk to you. I said, I just cannot live like this. And I took his cocaine. I tried to flush it down the toilet, and that's when it started punching. And I did get black eyes, and I got bloody nose, and but the big fear was that he kept saying he's gonna kill the baby.
That you were carrying?
I was carrying. I was 7 months pregnant. I was pretty big, and he kept saying, "I'm gonna kill the baby. I'm gonna kill the baby." And that's the worst fear I had. That he might punch. And then something would happen.
Whenever she told Reverend and Mrs. Moon about the beatings, Nansuk says they blamed her.
I was not an ideal wife for Hyojin. That's why Hyojin behaved a certain way toward me. And I wasn't a good member of their family. So also it was my fate.
Who told you that, Mrs. Moon? Or?
Both of them, yes. And it was my fate that I have to endure these things.
I did read her book. Her book was really good and enlightening about living inside the Moons and being married into the Moon family. Like, she was born into the Unification Church, so that was all she ever knew. She never expected to marry into the Moons. It's a really great inside look at the church. Some of my sourcing material does come from that. So I do recommend reading that book if you want an inside look at the family, what it's like to grow up as a unificationist and then to leave afterwards, and what it was like for her to rebuild her life. In 1999, another son, young Jin Moon, who was 21, committed suicide by jumping from a 17th-story balcony at Harrah's Hotel in Reno, Nevada. In 2008, Jin Moon died of a heart attack. Now we're going to go back to Jin Moon, who is the daughter of Moon and Mrs. Moon, but we need to talk about what precedes that just a little bit. In 2008, it was during the summertime, Moon and Mrs. Moon were injured when a helicopter they were traveling on crashed into a South Korean mountainside, and as they were recovering, their children began to squabble over the only major piece of Moon's empire that remained up for grabs, the Unification Church of America. Preston saw himself as the natural heir, but Injin also spotted an opportunity. So there was so much squabbling going on. So Justin approached her about staging a takeover, and she agreed at that time. So while Preston was out of the country, Sean, who headed the International Church, issued a memo saying that Injin was to be the chairperson of the unification movement in America. The American Church then convened a board meeting led by Injin. Most of the existing board members were pressured to resign and were replaced with Injin allies, after which Injin was formally elected chair. A bitter family feud, of course, ensued, and then Preston later staged his own boardroom coup at Unification Church International, the holding company for Moon family's U.S. business, giving him unfettered control over billions of dollars in assets. He used the proceeds to fund an offshoot movement that drew on his father's teachings without defying the Moon clan. Now, Injin continues, and we're going to talk about how her role in the church was for her time leading. Injin, meanwhile, assumed the role of chief pastor of the American Church and began using it as a vehicle for her own passions. She launches a band called Sonic Cult with Lorenzen.
I don't believe in an interventionist God, but darling, I know that you do. And if I did, I would kneel down and ask him not to interfere when it came to you, not touch your hair up on your head, leave you as you are. If he felt he had to direct you into my arms, into my arms, oh Lord, into my arms, oh Lord, into my arms, oh Lord, into my arms.
She also pushed back against traditions that had confined her in an unhappy marriage, openly condoning divorce and encouraging young members to marry for love. Injin
Moon and his wife's fourth child seemed suited for the task that she had undertaken. She had a modern American upbringing. She had a master's degree from Harvard. When she took over the Unification Church, she introduced a bold modernization program. Her aim, she said, was to transform the church into one that people, especially targeting young people, were, and this is a quote, dying to join, unquote. She renamed the church Loving Life Ministries, shelved the old hymn books, and launched a rock band, an offshoot of which played New York clubs under the moniker, which I mentioned before, Sonic Cult. She also discarded the old Korean inspiration traditions, bows and chanting, which gave way to Guitar Hero parties.
Okay, there's only one Guitar Hero.
And you're looking at him.
Love that. Open mics, concerts, and ping pong tournaments. What's more, Injun broke some long-standing taboos. Rather than adhering to church line on arranged marriages, for example, she encouraged young people to play a role in choosing their own spouses. Now, of course, this is not going to go over well with people who've been in the Unification Church for a while. Her reforms were met with heated resistance. Across the country, Moon's disciples took to the internet to denounce Injun's bling-bling style and her ridiculous accent. Now, it's been said, and I haven't listened to any of her interviews. I'm going to have to go back and listen to some recordings, but it is said that she spoke with a British accent, posh one, and fake. I've read about that, but I haven't listened to see what that sounds like. One online critic dubbed her ministry the Mushroom Church because all you do is sit there passively in the dark and are fed bovine excrement. Within 2 years, nationwide monthly attendance plunged from roughly 26,000 to less than 7,500, according to internal church documents. Now, it's always been hard to get an accurate number of membership within the Unification Church and attendance numbers. I don't know about those figures or accuracy, but I wouldn't doubt that attendance would have gone down under this because of the radical changes that would have been occurring. In early 2012, she gave an upbeat sermon about music, motherhood, and true love. Quote, "This is an incredible year, and I feel so many wonderful things are going to unfold," she said. "This is about you and me. This is about America. This is about the future." Now, the family feud is going to start erupting into open view as the siblings spar over the billions of dollars in assets in court. And one of Injun's deputies traveled the country delivering a PowerPoint presentation that cast Preston as a fallen Adam who was being controlled by Satan. This was the state of play in early 2012 when Injun disappeared. On September 2nd of that year, the movement was dealt even a bigger blow when Moon died of pneumonia at the age of 92. 2 weeks later, some 15,000 people packed into a Moon-owned stadium. Mrs. Moon vowed to continue her husband's quest to build, quote, "a world where all people live as one great family under God." After the service, she and her children knelt above the burial vault, clasped hands, and prayed. Through all of this, Injun remained conspicuously absent. It was around this time that a birth certificate for a 4-month-old boy began circulating on the internet. To the astonishment of Moon followers, the child's parents were none other than Injun Moon and Ben Lorenzen. And that would be the lead singer of the band that was started by her, called Sonic Cult. The baby probably would have come to light sooner had James Park not worked to cover up his existence. According to people close to the family, James helped Injun rent a house in Cape Cod where she and Ben could lay low during her pregnancy. Quote, "The core of our faith is purity before marriage and fidelity between husband and wife," longtime church member Mary Anglin told a reporter. "We've devoted our lives to this vision." Then Injun turned around and slapped us all in the face. The church was not happy at all with this secret baby, which is kind of ironic considering what Moon had done his whole life and other members of the family and abuses within the church and on and on and on. Mrs. Moon then moved to claim the inheritance her husband had promised. She wrested control of the International Church from Sean and issued a memo saying, quote, "Everything that is carried out in Korea from this day onward will be centered on True Mother." She later ousted Justin, who controlled most of Moon's Korean enterprises. After 5 decades spent in Moon's shadow, the kingdom was in her hands. She began speaking out critically in terms about Moon's preoccupation with America. During a trip to New York later that year, she complained that he had squandered 40 years in the United States for little return. Many members suspected at that time that she would turn her back on the American project entirely. Quote, Reverend Moon really cared about America, said Richard Barlow, a former Unificationist missionary, but his wife doesn't feel that strong connection, and she ousted her children who do. In late February, Mrs. Moon celebrated the arrival of Cheon Il-guk, Moon's global kingdom of peace and unity, before some 15,000 devotees who packed into Moon's own stadium in Korea. Wearing identical wedding garb, the crowd sang the Cheon Il-guk national anthem, and then Mrs. Moon, the former cook's daughter, swept into the stadium wearing a jeweled crown and purple robe with golden embroidery. She marched up to the long stairway to a giant replica of the Moon family palace, took a seat on the white throne. Next to her was another throne reserved for her dead husband. She then said, I quote, I proclaimed this the first year of Cheon Il-guk. Trumpets blared and the stadium filled with mist. Afterwards, several of Moon's old friends gave congratulatory speeches, including former Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert. Yes, that Dennis Hastert, who lauded the festivities as an affirmation of marriage and family. Quote, we often take the family for granted, Hastert said. However, when the family system begins to break down, all manner of personal and social programs emerge. It was a fitting epitaph to Moon's American project and his diminished political empire. I suspect now we're going to get to part of the Unification Church and offshoot that most people are probably most familiar with today because it's frequently in the news. So I'm pretty sure most of my audience here has heard of it. The Rod of Iron Ministries was formed as a result of a dispute between Hoon Jin Moon and his mother Hak Ja Han following the death of Sun Moon. This led to Hoon Jin and his wife to separate from the Unification Church and establish an offshoot sect named World Peace and Unification Sanctuary Church in early 2013. The church, also called Rod of Iron Ministries, officially opened in January 2015. Quote, look at all these crowns of sovereignty, he exclaimed, gazing upon his audience. One tenet of the sanctuary church is that all people are independent kings and queens in God's kingdom. A king of don't tread on me notion of personal sovereignty. Hence, symbolic gold and silver crowns bob on the rows and rows of heads. In 2015, King Jin Moon began renouncing his mother as the whore of Babylon, saying she was no longer a true mother. He also began teaching that Hoang Shil Kong, one of Sun Myung Moon's first disciples, was now true mother instead, as his spirit had married her. He and his wife, Yun-Ah Lee, also began assuming the titles Second King and Second Queen, respectively. In January 2015, Sean publicly renounced his mother for hijacking the Unification Church and rewriting and editing his father's religious texts. He has since taken to calling her the Whore of Babylon as well. The Sanctuary Church shunted Hak Ja Han aside, and a posthumous wedding was thrown for Reverend Moon. His spirit married 90-year-old Hoi Shil Kong, supposedly the first person to join his ministry in the early 1950s. She moved to Pennsylvania to live with Sean and his family. On Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday from 5 to 8 a.m., Pastor Sean records a live webcast called The King's Report in a room next to the kitchen. He sits at a desk with an AR-15 rifle prominently displayed next to his microphone. Always decked out in a shirt and tie, the camouflage suit jacket he bought on eBay, and a crown made of polished rifle shells. He'll interview an occasional guest and show clips from NRA's digital TV channel. In December of 2013, Justin Moon paid $2 million in cash for a 620-acre industrial site north of Newfoundland. On August 30th, 2016, he held the grand opening of Car Arms Tommy Gun Warehouse showroom store, the place to go for rifles, pistols, knives, and the Brooklyn Smashers steel baseball bat that in an emergency can be used to club an intruder or a deer to death. The grand opening guest of honor was Eric Trump. Quote, "That came about because God made it happen," Justin told a reporter. Somebody from the Trump campaign had called him out of the blue and said, quote, "Eric wants to come." So Eric came, and Sean introduced him by saying, quote, "It is my opinion that we must elect a president that will protect and expand the right to bear arms. I hope we can agree that Hillary Clinton should never be president of the United States. God bless the USA, and please buy some guns and ammo." By 2018, Moon Jae-moon began wearing a crown of bullets on his head and expressing a more militant and pro-gun rights ideology. Sanctuary Church assumed the name Rod of Iron Ministries and performed religious rites that heavily involved the AR-15 rifle. In October of 2019, members of the World Peace and Unification Sanctuary were invited to show their willingness to defend their families, communities, and nations by bringing their semi-auto rifles to a service in which their weapons were blessed. Moon leads his own group known as the Peace Police Militia and trains followers in deadly force. Its political positions, including patriot-moving talking points about smaller government and local sovereignty, align with the broader anti-government movement. Moon and other members of Sanctuary Church participated in the January 6, 2021 United States Capitol attack. Now Sean's upstart is rivaling its illustrious progenitor for political influence. It holds regular freedom festivals that are packed with right-wing speakers ranging from conservative Republicans to social media conspiracy celebrities. At one event, it featured a booth by the far-right militant group the Proud Boys. Sean rapped on stage about putting pedophiles in the wood chipper. Same event, it also featured a ceremonial burning of a pansexual pride flag and a speech by former Trump official Sebastian Gorka. At other events, they have also featured former Trump advisor Steve Bannon, ex-NRA spokesperson Dana Loesch, and Pennsylvania State Senator Doug Mastriano. Rod of Iron recently purchased a 30-acre compound near Waco, Texas, and a 130-acre training center on a mountain in eastern Tennessee, which Sean says will be their future headquarters. On Twitter, Sean has also posted a video of himself and Justin schmoozing it up with Don Jr. and former Republican presidential nomination candidate Vivek Ramaswamy at a party at Trump Tower. Moon Jae-moon, who took an active role in the Unification Church until about 8 years ago, who currently lives in New Jersey and has never spoken out publicly about Sean and Justin, has said, quote, "The language that's coming out of the Sanctuary Church is quite alarming, so she did feel obligated to say something. She loves her brothers, but says the possibility of commingling of gods and guns could inadvertently incite violence. It is still of great concern for the family, but she still wants healing and reconciliation. Quote, I still believe in the unity of my family. If all proceeds according to Sean and Justin's divine plan, the country will be ruled by monarchs drawn from their branch of the Moon family. If the kingdom comes in Sean's lifetime, he'll take the reins as King of the United States. Brother Justin, who serves as Sanctuary Church's de facto assistant pastor, is set to be the Inspector General, a super special prosecutor charged with rooting out the government corruption. It's not theocracy, Sean says. We would refer to it as libertarian Christian monarchy, or maybe a libertarian Republican democracy. Sean Moon's Constitution of the United States of Cheon-il-guk is a powerful document. The House of Representatives will elect the president. The king will pick the Supreme Court justices. Congress cannot levy income taxes or property taxes. It can't fund health care, education, Social Security, or Medicare. His constitution states that there will be no central bank, environmental protection agency, or national police force. There will be no standing military of any kind. Justin Moon says the United States will follow the Swiss model of national defense. He says the Swiss defense system has kept Switzerland safe and secure for a long time, so that's his example of how he would run things. Hak Ja Han's consolidation of power created a schism that tore apart friendships, marriages, and families. While most followers stayed with Hak Ja Han's mainstream unification church, she is the true mother. Some followed Preston and others joined Sean, who allied with another brother, Justin.
I don't need new tires, but stay tuned for the next episode.
If you're one of our haters who are out there watching,
I want to warn people about hypnoporn.
We need to stay meta.
Stop that.
Need new tires? Like, what?
if Jim would shut up for a second.
Oh, high fidelity.
Okay, don't tell me to shut up.
I'm not whining.
I eat doggies. I eat doggies.
Feels like a party.
Stop that.
It's a war. They have made it so that I cannot be celebrating July 4th.
I don't care. I'm gonna lie, I'm not gonna pretend. I don't care. How do I think? That's what I think. I don't care.
We're going to have to be smart. We're going to have to be strategic. We're going to have to be aggressive.
I'm an alpha guy.
I'll flip a table every time you aren't getting by.
Let's go. Just push.
It's all psychological warfare.
I'm not part of QAnon.
We know what they are doing.
For Trump.
If shit goes wrong, like, I will literally have to leave the country. Stop that.
I'll land my initial plane.
Okay, high five. This isn't the hi-fi show.
Good night. Nighty night.